Hello, my name is Justin McCarthy. I'm a Massachusetts attorney, and today I'm going to talk to you about forming rental agreements in Massachusetts. If you're a landlord and you're going to be forming a residential lease agreement, you have to be very careful because the laws in Massachusetts are very favorable towards the tenant, and if you make any mistake, you could end up owing a lot in fines and penalties, and actually having to pay your tenant's attorney costs and court costs if you end up in a legal dispute with them. So first of all, I would say if you're going to form a lease agreement and it's your first lease agreement, I would strongly advise that you talk to an attorney before you set anything up, okay, or put anything in writing. It's not uncommon for a landlord to set up his own lease agreement, have the tenant stop paying, bring the tenant to court, and then actually the landlord leaves court owing money to the tenant and the tenant's lawyers. So you have to be extremely careful, and you should always consult an attorney before setting up your first lease agreement. What you're going to need in order to set up a rental agreement in Massachusetts are a few things. The first and the most obvious is, of course, a lease. And the lease should be fairly simple. It should be written in plain language. Anybody who reads it should be able to understand what it's saying. It should be about 4 or 5 pages. What do you want in the lease? First of all, obviously, you want to name the parties in the agreement. Okay, so the landlord and any of the tenants. You want to make sure that if there's multiple tenants, that the tenants are jointly and severally liable for the terms of the agreement. And what this means is, if something happens and you need to go to court, you can collect the full amount that's owed from either of the two tenants. Okay, so let's say you rent to a boyfriend and a girlfriend, and a few months into the lease, the boyfriend takes off and he's not present anymore, you can't find him, and the girlfriend stops paying. You could bring her to court and collect the full amount that's owed from her, because they're jointly and severally liable for the terms of the agreement. Obviously, you want to put dates in there, when the agreement's going to start, when it's going to end. Is it a fixed term lease? Is it a month-by-month lease? Okay, so very basic terms like that. Obviously, you're going to want to put in the amount of the lease, when the monthly payment is due, how much the payment's going to be, where it's going to be sent, the name of the landlord, or how he wants the payment made to him or spelled out on the check. You are going to want to include in there what's going to be collected at the start of the lease. Okay, are you going to want just the first month's rent? Are you going to want first, last, and security deposit? Okay, what is the tenant going to need to come up with when he signs the lease? You're going to want to put in there what utilities the tenant is going to be paying and what utilities the landlord's going to pay. Generally, the tenant pays most utilities. However, you want to be careful about having them pay the water and sewer bill. Okay, if you want the tenant to pay the water bill or sewer bill, you can. However, the rules are very strict. Okay, on the metering, the sub-metering, you need to file a certificate with the Board of Health in the town you're renting in, showing that all of the plumbing was done by a licensed plumber, that the faucets are the proper faucets, proper toilets, and so on. It's a bit of a headache, and because of that, most landlords just pay the water bill. You want to mention what the tenant is restricted from doing. Okay, so most common is you prevent them from subleasing. You need to state that in the lease, or they'll be able to sublease. Restrictions on pets, restrictions on smoking, whatever it's going to be that you don't want them doing in the house, putting holes in the wall, whatever it might be. You need to be careful in what terms the tenant needs to abide by. Okay, it's okay to restrict the tenant from doing certain things. For instance, from nailing holes in the wall or from smoking. But you want to be very careful when you make them do something other than refrain from doing something. So, for instance, you probably don't want to put in the lease that the tenant needs to, say, clean the carpets before they leave, or have renter's insurance or something like that. Okay, you could say no subleasing, no pets, and so on, but you can't say, and also you must do this and you must do that. Okay. Okay, so that's it for the lease, but that's sort of just one document in a series of documents that go into a lease agreement. If there's a security deposit, you have to be very careful with how you handle it. Okay, because if you mess up with the security deposit, you violate any of the rules of the security deposit, and you end up taking your tenant to court, you could end up paying your tenant's legal bills. Okay, regardless of what the lease agreement says. So if you take a security deposit, you cannot take more than 1 month's rent in the amount of the security deposit. Okay, it's also very important that you let the tenant know where the deposit is being held. You tell them the bank's name, the account number, and so on. Okay, so be very careful if you're going to take a security deposit. In addition to that information, you need to give the tenant a lead paint disclosure. It's a standardized form. If you Googled it, you'd be able to find it. And you need to disclose to the tenant, first of all, if there's lead paint, if there is lead paint, if you've done anything to remedy the problem, or if you have no knowledge of lead paint. So you need to sign it, and the tenant also needs to sign it. Then there's a brochure that discusses all the hazards of lead paint, and it's produced by Housing and Urban Development. And if you went online, you could probably find that also. You're going to have to give them that brochure. And you are also going to have to provide them with a checklist. So before you sign the lease agreement, or on the day you're going to sign the lease agreement and collect the money, you go through the house with the tenant, and you have this checklist, and I use the same checklist for all my residential leases, and you make note of all of the problems in the house, or what problems don't exist. So you'll go into the kitchen. If the window in the kitchen is broken, you mark that on the checklist. Okay. If there's damage to the oven or something like that, you'd mark it on the checklist. And if not, if there's no damage, you just check OK, or a check mark, or something indicating that there is no problem. And then the landlord signs it and the tenant signs it. And the advantage of having this is, if there isn't a broken window in the bedroom, say, when you begin the lease, and there is when the tenant moves out, it's pretty clear that happened while the tenant was in possession of the property. So you'll have a much easier time deducting the cost of fixing the window from the security deposit if you have the checklist. All right? But you have to provide it to them regardless. Okay. And lastly, if the tenant requests, you have to provide the tenant with proof of insurance on the house. Okay, so just an overview. You need the lease, like I said, simple lease, but make sure you get all the terms in there that you need to. Plain language, 4 or 5 pages long is sufficient. You need the lead paint disclosure, telling the tenant if there's any lead paint in the house. You need the lead paint brochure. And you can, like I said, you can find it online. You could probably download it and email it to the tenant. But if you have the actual brochure, if you can give it to them, that would probably be best. And lastly, you need to give them the account information for the security deposit and proof of insurance if it's requested. You want the tenant to have copies of everything. the lease, the checklist, provide them with the checklist, everything that you sign, everything that's part of the lease agreement. Make sure your tenant gets copies. And again, like I said in the beginning, it is best to have a lawyer do all of this for you. If you shop around, you could probably find a lawyer who will draft a residential lease for you at a fairly reasonable price. Okay, so don't cut corners. Talk to a lawyer. Have a lawyer draft the agreement and do the work for you. And if you have any questions, let me know. I'll be happy to answer them for you. Thanks for your time. Take care.